I was only gone for 4 months. That's all it took. I'd inherited a beautiful piece of land from my grandfather, 2 acres of pristine lakefront property just outside the boundaries of Lakeview Estates, one of those pristine suburban developments with manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and a homeowners association that treated their rulebook like sacred scripture. My land wasn't part of their HOA. Never had been, never would be. It sat just beyond their jurisdiction, a fact that apparently drove their board president, Deborah, or as everyone called her behind her back, HOA Debbie, absolutely insane. My grandfather had refused multiple 6-figure offers from developers over the years. This land stays in the family, he'd always said. And now it was mine, the perfect spot to eventually build my dream home, with stunning lake views and enough distance from neighbors to actually enjoy peace and quiet. When my job sent me overseas for a 4-month contract, I didn't think twice about it. The land was undeveloped except for a small storage shed. What could possibly happen? I should have known better. I returned home on a sweltering July afternoon, jet-lagged and dreaming of a cold shower and my own bed. I drove down the winding road toward my property, planning to check on things before heading to my apartment in the city. That's when I saw it. At first I thought I'd taken a wrong turn. There, on MY property, stood a gleaming community pool complex. Olympic-sized swimming pool, kiddie splash pad, lounge chairs, umbrellas, a tiki bar, and even a volleyball court. A massive sign hung over the entrance: Lakeview Estates exclusive members-only aquatic center. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, and checked my GPS. No, this was definitely my property. Someone had built an entire pool club on my land while I was gone. I parked my car and walked toward the entrance, where a teenager in a polo shirt with the HOA logo sat checking membership cards. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who authorized this construction?" "The Lakeview Estates HOA board," he replied without looking up. "Members only, sir. Do you have your resident ID?" "I'm not a resident," I said. "I'm the owner of this land." That got his attention. He looked up, confused. This is HOA property. The community pool." "No," I said, pulling out my phone to show him the property records I'd downloaded months ago. "This is my property. And I didn't authorize any of this." The color drained from his face. You should probably talk to Mrs. Henderson." "Who's Mrs. Henderson?" "HOA board president. She's actually here, that's her by the snack bar." I turned to look where he was pointing and saw her immediately. Deborah Henderson, HOA Debbie herself. Designer sunglasses, meticulously highlighted bob haircut, clipboard in hand, supervising a group of workers installing what looked like an outdoor shower station. I walked straight toward her, blood pounding in my ears. "Mrs. Henderson?" I said, keeping my voice unnaturally calm. She turned, gave me a quick once-over and frowned slightly. "Members only, I'm afraid. The guest passes aren't available until next weekend." "I'm not looking for a guest pass. I'm Jason Miller. This is my property you've built on." She tilted her head and gave me a condescending smile. "Oh, you must be confused. This is Lakeview Estates community property. We acquired it for our new aquatic center." "Acquired it?" I echoed. "I never sold this land." She waved a dismissive hand. "The property was abandoned. We followed all necessary procedures. I was overseas for work. 4 months. That's not abandonment." "We sent notices," she said, her smile never wavering. "When we received no response, the board took action for the good of the community." "Notices to where?" "I never received any notification about this. We posted them on the property, of course. And at the county office." She adjusted her sunglasses. "Look, Mr. Miller. Jason Miller. Mr. Miller. The aquatic center is already built. It cost the HOA over $600,000. Our members love it. It's become the heart of our community in just 2 months. Surely you can appreciate that." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "You built a pool club on property you don't own without permission, and your defense is that it was expensive and people like it." "The community needed this facility," she said, her voice hardening slightly. "The nearest public pool is 20 minutes away. Our property values have already increased by 12% since construction. Perhaps we could discuss reasonable compensation for the land, but removing the facility is simply not an option." I noticed people were watching us now, curious families in swimsuits, hovering near enough to eavesdrop. "This isn't over," I said quietly. "Not by a long shot." She gave me a patronizing smile. "I understand you're upset. Why don't you leave your contact information with our office? The board meets next Thursday." We can discuss this then. I walked away before I said something I'd regret. Back in my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel trying to process what had just happened. These people had straight up stolen my land and built a pool club on it. And they were acting like I was being unreasonable for objecting. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of everything: the pool, the buildings, the sign, even Debbie gesturing to her minions. Then I called the only lawyer I knew, my college roommate Mark, who'd gone into real estate law. They did what? He nearly shouted after I explained the situation. Built a full pool club. Olympic-sized pool, the works. On land they don't own? Correct. Without your permission? Not a word. Mark let out a low whistle. Jason, this is insane. This is not how property law works. At all. They can't just take your land because you were out of town. That's what I thought. Document everything. I'll meet you at the county records office tomorrow morning. We need to see what they actually filed. I spent the night in a hotel, too wired to sleep, researching property laws and adverse possession. By morning I had a plan taking shape. At the county office, Mark and I discovered that the HOA had indeed filed some paperwork. A dubious claim of abandonment and a hastily approved conditional use permit. The clerk who helped us looked increasingly uncomfortable as she pulled the records. This never should have been approved, she muttered, showing us the signature of the county commissioner who'd signed off on it. Gerald Thompson? Mark raised an eyebrow. Isn't he the one who lives in Lakeview Estates? Yes, the clerk said quietly. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but he and Mrs. Henderson are cousins. The picture was becoming clearer. This wasn't just HOA overreach, it was corruption plain and simple. What's your next move? Mark asked as we left the building. I smiled for the first time since I'd returned. I'm going swimming. The next day, I showed up at my property, the Lakeview Estates Aquatic Center. In swim trunks and flip-flops, property deed and driver's license in hand. I approached the teenager at the entrance with a friendly smile. Afternoon, I said cheerfully. Jason Miller. I believe you're expecting me? He checked his clipboard nervously. You're not on the guest list, sir. I handed him my ID and a copy of my property deed. I think you'll find I don't need to be on any list. This is my property. He stared at the documents, then at me, then back at the papers. Let me call Mrs. Henderson. No need, I said, walking past him. I know my way around. I strolled directly to the pool, set my towel on a lounge chair, and slipped into the water. It was, I had to admit, a beautiful pool. Crystal clear, perfectly heated. My property might have been stolen, but at least they built something nice on it. It took exactly 7 minutes for Debbie to come storming poolside, flanked by 2 men in polo shirts with security embroidered on them. Mr. Miller, she hissed, you need to leave immediately. This is a members-only facility. I floated lazily on my back. Actually, Debbie, can I call you Debbie? I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Swimming on my property. This is trespassing, she said, her voice rising. Security, please escort Mr. Miller out. The security guards looked uncertainly at each other. They were clearly pool attendants, not actual security professionals. I've spoken with the county sheriff, I said calmly, still floating. They've confirmed that since I have documentation proving my ownership of this land, removing me would constitute assault. But feel free to try, I'm sure the lawsuit would be fascinating. Debbie's face had turned an impressive shade of red. Residents were watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. What exactly do you want? She demanded. I stood up in the pool and smiled at her. For starters, a chair at Thursday's board meeting. By Thursday, word had spread throughout Lakeview Estates. The HOA had built their fancy new pool club on land they didn't own, and now the actual owner was raising hell. The meeting room was packed, standing room only, with residents spilling into the hallway. Debbie tried to maintain control, but the crowd was restless. When she finally introduced our guest, Mr. Miller, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I walked to the front, thanked her politely, and then addressed the room. For those who don't know me, my name is Jason Miller. 4 months ago, I left for a work assignment overseas. When I returned this week, I discovered that your HOA had constructed an entire aquatic center on my property without my knowledge or consent. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some residents looked shocked, others nodded knowingly. I've confirmed with county records that I am, in fact, still the legal owner of that land. No sale or transfer ever occurred. I paused, letting that sink in. Which means your HOA spent over $600,000 of your money building a facility on land they don't own. The murmurs grew louder. Someone shouted, "Is that true, Debbie?" Debbie stood, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "We followed procedures for abandoned property." "I was overseas for work," I interrupted. "4 months. With an active property tax account and current payments. That's not abandonment under any legal definition." "We sent notices." "To where?" "I never received any communication from your HOA." A middle-aged man in the second row stood up. "We were told the land had been purchased fair and square." "That's what you said, Debbie?" Others nodded in agreement. Debbie's professional veneer was cracking. The board acted in good faith. "Did Commissioner Thompson recuse himself from the permit approval?" I asked innocently. "Given that he's your cousin and a resident here?" The room erupted. Accusations flew. Residents demanded answers about where their HOA fees had gone. One woman shouted something about her rose bushes being sighted while the board was busy stealing land. I waited for the chaos to subside before speaking again. "I understand that none of you individually are responsible for what happened. And I recognize that the aquatic center has become important to your community." I paused. "That's why I'm not going to demand its immediate demolition." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. "Instead," I continued, "I'm proposing a solution that benefits everyone." My proposal was simple. I would officially lease the land to the HOA for the aquatic center, with 3 non-negotiable conditions. 1. The HOA would pay fair market rent for the property, as determined by an independent appraiser. 2. Debbie Henderson and any board members who had approved the illegal construction would resign immediately. 3. I would receive a lifetime membership to the facility with full privileges. "You have until Monday to accept these terms," I concluded. "After that, I'll be forced to pursue legal remedies, which would likely include a court order to remove all structures from my property, plus damages." I left the meeting to a mixture of applause and anxious chatter. By Sunday night, I received a call from the HOA's attorney. They had accepted all my terms. Over the next month, an extraordinary transformation took place. Debbie and 3 other board members resigned in disgrace. The new board, eager to make amends, not only agreed to my rental terms but also renamed the facility Miller Lakeside Aquatic Center, as a gesture of goodwill. The independent appraisal set the annual rent at $64,000, a tidy sum for land that had been sitting unused. The HOA members, relieved that they wouldn't lose their pool club, actually seemed grateful for my generosity. I used part of the first rent payment to build a small cottage on the undeveloped portion of my property, close enough to enjoy the lake view, far enough to maintain privacy. I became a regular at the pool, making friends with many of the residents who, it turned out, had never much liked Debbie and her rigid rule enforcement anyway. 6 months after my return, I was sitting on my porch, watching families enjoy the aquatic center that now generated a substantial passive income for me. A familiar beige Lexus pulled into the parking lot, and out stepped Debbie, looking uncomfortable in civilian clothes without her clipboard. She'd apparently returned for her grandson's birthday party, which his parents had booked at the facility. Our eyes met across the distance. I raised my glass in a small salute. She quickly looked away and hurried inside. Sometimes life sends you a Debbie who tries to take what's yours. But if you play it smart, you might just find yourself sitting poolside watching your bank account grow while they pay for the privilege of using what they tried to steal. The next time you go away for a few months, remember, check on your property now and then. You never know when someone might decide it's the perfect spot for a community pool. Or don't. If you're lucky like me, their mistake might just become your jackpot.